Okay, without further ado, we have Dr. Bente Lundh talking about medical marijuana.
Or marijuana. Thank you. Hello? Oh. Okay, so before you change the title slide, a couple disclaimers. So I'm a pediatrician and a mental health specialist, so I'm coming from a medical health background. I'm not addressing legalization per se, but I think it should be decriminalized. And I also had huge personal conflict doing this because I'm usually, I can't think of any other issue that I've been on the conservative side of this of the spectrum. So, yeah, that's been California. Yeah. Yes. So the audacity of this slide is the suggestion that marijuana is harmless, even less harmful than peanuts. Saying that there are no deaths from marijuana is like saying you cannot die from skydiving. You only die because you hit the ground. Thank you, Nathan Kowalski, for that quote. Busy slide. In the 1960s, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, was discovered as the psychoactive agent of marijuana. In the 1980s, we discovered cannabinoid receptors in the brain where THC binds. It wasn't until the early 90s that we discovered endogenous cannabinoids, so that our own brain is making these molecules that are helping modulate various brain functions. Oops. So 3 kinds of medical marijuana. The first one is approved, Marinol, Sesamet. They're either Schedule 2 or 3, need a doctor's prescription. FDA studies, too fast. Okay, smoked cannabis falls into that the third group. And so the American Society of Addiction Medicine is against this. Marijuana is the only medication that's smoked, not prescribed by a physician, no standard dosing, not FDA approved. And it's approved based on voting. So here we go. In the United States right now, there's 23 states that have approved medical marijuana, 2 of them fully legalizing it. And a Pew Research Center survey for the first time, 54% of Americans are pro-legalization, and 75% think it will eventually become legal nationwide, whether you're against it or not. So the big concern is that the medicalization of smoked marijuana has distorted the perception of known risks and purported benefits of the drug. So this is teen use, high school use. In 2013, only 20.6% of 12th graders thought occasional marijuana use was harmful. And so we have all other substances of abuse or use in teens is decreasing. The blue line, the only one that's going up is marijuana. So yeah, 6.5% of seniors are using marijuana daily. So what's better? This is a question I always get asked. It's a stupid question, but alcohol is worse for violence or liver damage. Marijuana is worse when it comes to IQ, mental health, loss of competitiveness, and motivation. Both cause traffic accidents and fatalities. Both can lead to addiction. It's not whether it's legal or not. That's the issue. So this is way too much information, but basically where the cannabinoid receptors in the brain are is where you're going to get an effect, whether positive or negative. So like the amygdala, which relates to anxiety, panic, paranoia, the hippocampus for memory. So the biggest sort of recent study was a longitudinal study over 38 years, following more than 1,000 individuals, and neuropsych testing at separate points, and basically showing a significant IQ drop and a lot of other neuropsych problems. So the American Psychiatric Association says there's no current scientific evidence that marijuana is in any way beneficial for the treatment of any psychiatric disorder. Basically, if anything, it's the opposite, especially amongst adolescents whose brains are still growing. So there's increased risk of anxiety and depression, but causality is difficult to establish because mentally ill people use marijuana more often. But the risk of psychosis is pretty close to causal. there's a higher amount of CBD cannabinoid receptors in the prefrontal cortex, and schizophrenics have more of those receptors. So it makes sense that we see more psychosis. So yeah, there's addiction and dependence, and there is withdrawal symptoms. It's not as significant as like withdrawing from cocaine or heroin, but we can still define dependence based on the typical definitions. So, you know, another issue is drugged driving. Motor vehicle accidents remain the #1 cause of death amongst youth. The effects of marijuana and alcohol are additive. The marijuana by itself probably doubles your risk of fatality. And a lot of teens are smoking and drinking, but mostly more smoking because they think it's harmless. So this was to lighten it up. I do have friends who are joking about this, applying to colleges in Washington, Colorado only. But I guess it's self-explanatory. I'm not going to say anything more. So every single major medical organization in the United States is opposed to smoked cannabis and also legalization of marijuana for recreational or medical use. And that's largely because adolescents are particularly vulnerable. They do support rigorous research into the defined like chemicals. So this came from the Weed blog, where this guy claims that the American Academy of Neurology endorses medical marijuana, which is just not true. If you read what they say, there may be some benefit, but really the research should go into the individual chemicals, the cannabidiols and stuff. So more misleading claims. Cannabis has 20 times the anti-inflammatory power. Cannabis cures cancer. Ooh, and it's this big conspiracy by Big Pharma. Is nobody worried about big marijuana? But these statements are based on the chemicals, not the marijuana joints, you know. So like, yeah, some of the cannabinoids are anti-inflammatory, for example. So this is edible marijuana and also the synthetic. So at the beginning of this month, there's emergency rules in Colorado where they're going to define what edible marijuana is after several deaths related to edible marijuana. And also, just this week, New Hampshire declared a state of emergency because there were 44 overdoses from smoking or ingesting a synthetic marijuana. None of those patients actually died. And then, yeah, this is just, to me, the whole medical marijuana thing is a joke. It's being pushed by non-scientists, not medical people, and most of them are using it for like vague, like pain. They're not for the original recommendations like HIV wasting and nausea from chemotherapy. And so to me, it's a backway entry into legalization.
Thank you, Bente. Okay, questions right here?
Can you tell me more about the overdose deaths from eating cannabis? Like, is there any more information about that? Was it like someone ate it as a drug? Was it just like,
okay.
That seems...
Yeah, so it wasn't, so the question is, they want some more detail about the deaths attributed to the edible cannabis. So that was in April, and I think probably a lot of people heard it on the news. One was a exchange student. He was a college student in Colorado, but he was from overseas, and he bought a package of like 6 edible marijuana cookies or brownies, and he ate one, didn't feel the high, so then he ate another one, and at the end of it he ate 6, and he was running around the apartment in basically like a psychotic episode and jumped off the balcony and died. And the autopsy report, like, not to make light of it, but it goes back to the quote about skydiving. So the cause of death was an accident. He fell, you know, hit his head, blah, 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 but contributed to by marijuana. And the other case was, I don't know the details as well, but it was a 911 call, the wife calling 911 saying, my husband's going crazy, he just ate some edible marijuana, he's got a gun, and he killed her. So, but aside from that, I think a bigger...
But it's not like someone ingested and like overdosed on marijuana.
Well, I would say the first one sure was. I would say the first one sure was because they didn't find any other chemicals on like autopsy.
But he fell off, he jumped or fell off the balcony. That's not, it's not.
Okay, so yeah, like you hit the ground from.
And like they're becoming depressed.
No, okay, so true. So there's no known lethal dose, like overdose lethality from marijuana because it doesn't affect your brain stem. It doesn't affect your respirations or your heart rate, like heroin, exactly. So there's no lethal overdose from that standpoint. But are there deaths from marijuana? For sure. Did that guy that went psychotic running around his apartment and jumped out, that was directly related to the marijuana.
I mean, yes, but I mean, think about the.
I think we should ask another question.
Okay, another question, please. Does anyone have a question back there? Over.
Is that me?
No, the fellow back there. Oh, right there. Go.
I've got some intellectual disagreements with what you said, but I think in general, for a position that's opposed to.
Is there a question?
The question is, with regard to deaths, do you feel that cannabis is even remotely as dangerous as prescription drugs, where people are having psychotic reactions, violent reactions, and actual deaths from real toxicity all the time? I mean, only 2 deaths in all of Colorado? It's important to stop those deaths, but don't you think that other prescription drugs are actually a lot worse?
Well, I'm not sure that I would compare them, but I wouldn't disagree that there aren't dangers from prescription drugs, especially when they're not used correctly. I think a lot of the deaths that you're referring to, they're not being used appropriately. And I think the other main, really getting back to the medical marijuana, which I didn't really address. Sorry,
Bente.
I'm done.
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry. This is PechaKucha. PechaKucha. We want one sentence.
Finish it.
End the sentence. Aideen has overruled me.
Oh, okay. So the end of the sentence is that, yeah, I think we need scientific rigor and not like anecdotal reports. So yeah, I agree. Those comments were anecdotal, but it's leading to some changes in the regulation because of those deaths. And yeah, there's a lot of problems with prescription drugs, but it's when they're being misused or abused mostly. And life hazardous.
Thank you.